then I say, okay, can you go to your first regret or your first betrayal? Something like this. And I say, can you remember that? Now, what was the wallpaper like? What was your father wearing or your mother? What was she wearing and all that? And so I get them in position. And when everything's right and the lighting's in position, I say, okay, now go to that place, go to that betrayal and go in your mind, forget about me now. And I correct a finger and you can see them departing out of the back door and their face falling as they go to that place.
At the beginning of making something, the artist is the fixed, central point that everything is organized around. It seems it can't be any other way. You are a singular artist doing something, chasing something to make something new. Often it falls flat, but sometimes a few sneak through. A couple are good, maybe even for a short time great. Interestingly, good art always seems to have a bit more authenticity. Yours, but also theirs as well. In other words, the authenticity of the human experience seems to be the currency we all embrace. We all can relate to it. We begin as the artist thinking the work is all about us. I mean, how could it be otherwise? But somehow, in the process of making it, sharing it, and showing, it becomes clear that others can find themselves in your art too. It no longer becomes solely about you. It is out of your hands and goes off into the world without even looking back. Of course, this is rarely the case for most art made. First, it has to be exceptionally authentic. It has to be poignant and stirring. It has to be unforgettable. Edward Povey, a British painter whose work loosely can be described as emotional realism, happens to be all three. Join me now for an incredibly candid, moving and thoughtful conversation. It was for me, and I think will be for you too, unforgettable. To see Edward Povey's extraordinary art and social links, click on podcasts at art2life.com. Oh, and one more thing. If you've been enjoying the Art2Life podcast, can you do me a favor and leave a review? I just would love to hear from you. Okay, let's dive into this conversation with Edward now. Welcome to Art2Life, a podcast for the creatively curious. My name is Nicholas Wilton, and each week I'll help you rediscover not just the art of your life, but the art in your life. Join me as we explore that perfect blue at twilight, the wild frontiers of art making, and the extraordinary joy of finding your way as you go. Edward, thanks so much for joining us today from your studio, and super appreciate it.
My pleasure. I'm honored.
My first kind of question coming out of this, I mean, I know from reading and looking at your work, so much of your, I mean, it's just so personal, obviously, and it is derived a lot from early childhood. And I don't want to get into the general kind of things you probably are always talking about, but we have to kind of set the stage here. So I know you're living in England, right? You're talking to us from England, is that correct?
In Devon in the south of England, yeah.
Yeah. So take us to where, you know, your origin story a little, how you're using your art and where this began and the early childhood stuff a little bit, how it informs your work and how you connect these times.
Yeah. I think this childhood question for artists can be quite an interesting paradox because I think for those in the arts generally, there isn't such a thing as a bad or a good childhood. Actually, a bad or a good early life, because many writers, artists, musicians would maintain that if you have, should we call it an interesting childhood, it's all the better.
Yeah.
It's all the better for your work because it's in a way enriching. So my father was very troubled. He was quite a tyrant. He was a sadist. I was an only child. And he was a sadist and threatened me with death, continually, and a lot of other things, really almost from birth. My mother and I were threatened with death. And he always used to say, you will never make a man. Well, I was a child. I didn't know whether I was going to grow up to be a man or a woman or or a porpoise, I have no idea. But the thing about it is all this has great advantages because as an artist by nature, I suppose, I was sensitive. And all this just went to make me more sensitive, actually. And also to have this uncertainty about my gender. In that sense, I'm actually heterosexual, but it left me with a rather wonderful uncertainty. So here we now are in times that are very interesting, very different from when I was growing up, and where there's this great interest in human vulnerability and mortality and gender. And I really feel it. I really feel all that. But I have to emphasize, I never used to emphasize this, but it's increasingly becoming clear to me. It isn't on the negative side of the equation that I'm interested in vulnerability. I'm interested in it as a fact of human life. We stand on a planet surrounded by storms and uncertainty, and that is the nature of life and was always the nature of life, actually. So it isn't so much negative as a matter of fact. So my feeling is that, and what I think permeates my work at the moment, is that when you embrace someone, when you know someone, when you put your arms around someone, you're really holding everything that they have ever been. You're holding their birth. You are, in a sense, holding the oncoming death and their regrets and loves and longings and the beautiful things that have happened to them in life. You're holding a whole package. And when you have a discussion with someone, just ordinary sitting on the train having a discussion, although that actor of, yeah, I'm good, I've had a good day, is coming forward to the front of the stage, behind that actor stand the whole cast, not far back in the shadows at all.
Right.
They're all right there. So that really interests me. Yeah.
Yeah. And, I teach a lot of artists and sometimes I've come up with different ways to describe art making, but what you're saying about this uncertainty, and I mean, people don't like uncertainty, as you know, but
no.
I think sometimes I describe art making it's like a practice where we get to learn about uncertainty, the actual process. Now,
yes.
In kind of like, you don't have to do it in your life. You can kind of like try it out on for size in your art because it's uncertain and things, you're going to ruin it. You're going to fix it. You can't, you look at other people's work, all of that. And so I think it's a good place to get more comfortable with uncertainty. But what's also interesting when you're talking about this challenging period of time that you had, when you were young, it's not good nor it's not bad, but it is trauma, right? Trauma is different than good or is interesting. Trauma creates and sets up patterns, survival patterns, thoughts about how the world is that might not serve you, all of that.
Yeah, true.
But I love how you're using this. I mean, that, like, we're all perfectly right in the right time and spot to make our art because all that history is what we're using. But did you come out of this? I mean, are we talking about hope in the work? I mean, you're sorting things. You generate this amazing work, but is there hope in here? Is it how you reframe it? It's like your father said, you're never going to become a man. And it's like, you're a hero in the world and in the art world and what you're pulling off. It's sort of like, I will show you. That creates a lot of momentum. So people that doubt me, I mean, I relate to and by the way, I had English parents and I didn't have what you had, but very much we lived on that front facing character with all the other stuff going behind. My father wouldn't reveal what was inside of him. It was quiet desperation, sweep it under the mat. And it affected me to search for the opposite. But I relate completely to what you're saying. But is there hope mixed in with this for you?
I think there is everything mixed in, really, everything. I mean, it truly is uncertain in the best way as well as the worst way. We don't know whether before the end of this interview I might have a heart attack, for example, or in some way a great success, might roll in by email while we're talking. And it is always that way. And so here is the thing about this, actually. I feel that my job is to make the paintings and bring to them my life experience with an authenticity, not a particular need for drama at all, actually, but just authenticity about the human experience. And some people may disagree with me on this, but I feel that when the viewer comes into the room and the painting is there, my interpretation of the painting becomes completely irrelevant.
Mm-hmm.
My life becomes completely irrelevant. And they bring the whole entourage of their life experience to it,
yes,
and interpret it accordingly. So although we may talk about what I bring to the art, what they find in the art is more than anything else themselves.
Yes, yes.
And society may do the same thing. Art that winds up in museums and is very highly thought of, well, it happens to be the needs of the time, the sensibility, the state of society at the time. The art happens to speak to pure coincidence. It doesn't necessarily mean good or bad are very useless terms here. It simply means it's relevant, doesn't it?
Yes,
it's relevant to the time.
Yes, and might be, and clearly for some and not others, right? People are going to come to this, and they're the right ones to be looking at it, who stop and stare like there's something in it for them. It's so interesting. I was looking, once I read about this challenging childhood you had, and I just, oh my God, fearing for your life, constant stress of survival. And your work, it's so devoid of sentimentality. You are not judging it. It is just, when I look at the work, it's so just real. I mean, it is just as things are. And I get that visually. What you were describing, it's not good or it's not bad. It's just here. Actually, this is my experience, and this might be helpful.
I love to hear you say that, Nick. Actually, I really love that. Yeah.
Yeah, I so get that. And you're doing it consistently across. I'm looking at the work right now online. You're doing it consistently all the way across. And it's not about you. I mean, it is about you, but you're putting something out that is universal, and it's like a poem that, to me, and this is what's so interesting, and I want to kind of dive into this with you. How do you think it's possible to, I know you cut out a lot of the outside world, you kind of focus in, but isn't it interesting? I think that the success of your work is because people relate to it. It's very community minded in a way. I mean, isn't that interesting? Or how do you do that? I don't know.
Well, I think partly it's because we are all very, very similar on this planet. What is that saying, that there's no one that much better than you or that much worse in reality?
I love that.
We're all very similar. Khalil Gibran said something rather like that, didn't he?
Yeah.
So I think if you get really honest with yourself and go to the heart of your own human experience, it won't be far from most other people.
Yeah.
Because you're so similar.
I was talking to my daughter about, I don't know, some reality TV show, and we were trying to understand, like, what is the draw for this? I forget, it was some dumb reality show of people you don't really care about, but there's something, and I think it's what you're describing. We're interested, and it's reassuring and comforting when we see the movie star, stubbing their toe. It's like, oh, they're like me. Before I saw this show, I thought I was just kind of more worthless than I am now. I think that everyone's walking around the planet with the same kind of, challenges that we always feel inadequate, So I think that's part of it, maybe. I'm not sure, but I love it. I mean, I think that getting really personal with your particular reasons and how this is an amalgam of your whole life and really diving into that makes it universal for all of us.
Well, I love that. I mean, I would love to think that. Yeah. That inadequacy, and, a lot of artists talk about feeling inadequate, but inadequacy is really just another word for humility, which is also just another word for reality. The reality that, of course, you're inadequate. Who isn't? I mean, how can you be adequate?
Yeah.
I mean, knowledge is infinite. We know about 2% of what there is to be known. Oh, you feel inadequate? How surprising.
Right.
I mean, really.
Yeah. And we're these little speck on a planet that's spinning 50,000 miles an hour, going around a universe in a star galaxy we don't understand or know. We don't know how our own brain works. I mean,
oh, I feel so vulnerable. Yeah. How surprising. How surprising, yes. There's a white hot sun just right there,
Yeah, right. And by the way, you will cease. The only certainty we have is that this is going to end for you. Hopefully.
Yes, don't worry, dear. You're going to die soon. And find out what that's all about. Yeah. So all this is normal.
Yeah. Yes. Oh, crazy. So your pictures, I don't even really want to call them paintings. I don't know how you describe them, but your paintings, they're combining realism, the coloration, all of it. Tell me a little bit about your process here. I know I read that you studied some color stuff with Skip Lipke, which I love his work, and there's a mood and a quality. And it was like, of course, like he's got that. There's a bit of that feeling in his work too. I've never met him, or I don't know. I just looked at his work a lot, and I studied it when I was learning color and everything.
He's a very good colorist, isn't he? Along with Milt Kobayashi, they are both exquisite colorists. It's like they can't do it wrong.
Yeah.
It's a little bit like Maurice Denis or Vuillard. They are the modern version in terms of color. They are the modern version of those colorists.
So you're this lifelong student aggressively going after to learn. I mean, did you call him up? I mean, how did you find these mentors? And it's just so interesting. It takes a lot of confidence, I think. I was always scared to ask people for help. So I'd look at pictures, but I would never call them. You actually studied with Skip Lipke. How did that come about?
Well, Skip will probably not even remember who I am. But we were in the same gallery down in Soho in New York. And then he took off with Steve Diamond, who is now Arcadia in New York, and was actually in Los Angeles. So we did have that mutual friend. And I can't honestly remember how I contacted him. I guess I just must have seen his paintings on the wall in the gallery and asked for his number, basically. And the process, I think I was just very lucky in the people I ran across, who I bumped into, basically. I didn't exactly try. I wasn't overly forward, like pestering them, to teach me stuff.
Yeah.
It was never quite like that. But you asked about my process. I never really, this will sound very strange, but I never really attempt to make art. I study the genres. I'm very interested in the genres and where we are now and everything else in the history of art. But I never exactly particularly attempt to make art per se. What I do is I write a lot all the time. I have a studio diary that runs hundreds, thousands of pages. And so I write because what I'm doing by writing, I'm shaping ideas in the air, like shaping smoke in the air, because words are so immediately clear about ephemeral and abstract ideas. They can shape a concept quite readily in vocabulary.
Mm-hmm.
Something that if you were to try to draw it would take half a day and you would lose it because of the ephemeral nature of it.
Yes.
So I start with that. And an idea travels in the form of writing. It can be just a week, but often it's years. And then I go to very tiny sketches, scribbles really, on purpose, because on that scale, you can only deal with the largest elements. And I want to shape the overall movement in the painting that reflects this idea, but also forms itself into a shape that has a gesture, I suppose, really, a kind of human gesture in a sense. So then the drawings get larger and larger. And the thing about it is I'm mixing perspective.
Yes.
I actually use pre-Renaissance perspective for a reason, not Cubist perspective, because that, in a sense, was the rediscovery of the Robert Campin workshop, of pre-Renaissance flat perspective. And the reason is this, that canvases are flat. And I'm asking my viewers to swallow an enormous lie, because my figures, I try my absolute best to make them look three-dimensional and to make them look translucent and bruised and troubled and all that stuff. So I'm asking them to accept an enormous fib because the canvas is flat and it's made of paint. So like any good criminal, I try to make it, I try to make them swallow this lie by telling them a whole lot of truth. And the way that children, when they draw, because they're so honest, basically, and innocent, if they draw a round table, they know it's round, so they draw it as round on the painting. And then the floor is always at the bottom because floors are always below you. And then the legs, they have trouble with the legs, because how do you bring the legs from the table to the floor? So they always have trouble with that. So I bring the floor up flat because I know the floor is flat. It covers the back of the canvas. Tables are completely flat. Cups and bowls are a compromise, and the figures are viewed head on. So it is not a picture that you would ever see with your eye, but it is a picture that you would see with your mind, because we know the table is flat. We know the floor is flat.
And the way you're painting them is so truthful, is so accurate, right? I think because of the information that you're giving us on the floor or on the cup, or, it's so believable that we can almost skip, oh yeah, well, of course, we see floor so strongly, we see teacups so strongly because you're able to paint these so realistically. But I get it. It's more like memory. I have memories where I'm presented with things there. It's like an icon, it's a symbol. Once it's flattened and brought up, it becomes a symbol of a thing that's much greater than that thing. Your painting's not about a teacup. Once you switch the perspective, it seems to me, and this is what I'm experiencing. So they become these placeholders in a way that lets me in. Does that make sense? Is that part of it?
Yeah, that is what I hope.
Yeah, I get that.
Because what I'm trying to do is I'm really, really not exactly trying to make a painting. I'm no more interested in brushes and paint than a writer is really interested in his pen. Oh my God. So, writers don't get together and say, so what pen do you use? I'm really interested.
Yeah, right.
I mean, looking at your writing, your writing's just so that quality in your work. What pen do you use?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? What an absurd question. And so I'm not so interested in paint and brushes except that as a means to an end. And I don't want a depiction of a situation, because what I want is I want a body that is sweaty and has little physical illnesses, little problems. I want a bra in the corner and the tea to be spilled. Mm-hmm. And I want the smells of cooking and sex and a very ordinary life. But doing that is just incredibly difficult. I find it really hard.
Yes.
So I really struggle with it. The paintings take way too long, and it's because the idea isn't to make a painting or to make art. It's to depict what we know very well. We all know this. We all know a messy lifestyle and a human life. And that's why it takes so long to get ready to go out. It's because we're trying to pull ourselves together so we look reasonable on the street.
Yes, yes.
And try to wash off all those smells and everything else and cover it up with underarm deodorant. We
Right.
We try to overcome our humanity so as to then meet other people.
Yes. And they're trying to do the same, but you don't actually get to know somebody. You don't actually know them. And then when you do become in relationship or their guard is let down, it's so wonderful to actually be seen for all your warts and blemishes and still be loved, right?
Yes,
that is in fact yes. I mean, it must be gratifying. I know it is for me when I try and I struggle and I show this thing that I made and somebody walks up and says, not only do I want that, or I can relate to this. And it's like, really? Because this is truthfully it. I wonder when you shared about the childhood stuff and the difficulties and the challenges that there was this, it's like you have a family and there's how things are supposed to be. There's sort of the typical thing. Here's the dad, here's the mom, I'm the kid, I got, and then there's the underbelly of actually what's happening. I mean, I know even from my own experience, it's like, it was so frustrating when my parents were going through all this stuff. My mom was crying upstairs and my dad was reading the paper and I'm this little kid. I couldn't stand it. He's not aware. I'm this emotional thing and I grab him together and try and make him talk. I mean, all the stuff a kid shouldn't be doing. A kid should be playing with marbles at that age.
Yes.
But is there that part of it? Like you're just hell bent on showing truthfully, this is it, like warts and all. And it's beautiful and it's maybe helpful for you and for us. I mean, showing the hand and there's like, you painted the hand with the scrape on it, like there's a transparency to even the skin of your figures. Like you can see a lot. I don't know how you do this, by the way. It's incredible. It's like you can peer through the flesh a little. You're always going under the facade. Like there's no facade here. There's no pretension. There's none of that. But does that ring true for you, what I'm saying?
It does. Just a little aside on what you were saying about meeting people, when you've done this. And then when you have a relationship, they get to really meet the way you really are. Just a thing about that, I really admire. I've met some people, mainly in Europe, I think in continental Europe, like France, places like France and Italy, where someone you love is more liable to tell you smell really nice. When you haven't bathed, you smell really nice. And there's an atmosphere about them, and you can see it in French films, in Italian films. You can see, this astonishes me, but you can see that they actually love what people are.
Uh-huh.
Not their representative, not their advertising agent.
Yes.
They actually love human beings as they really are. I never deliberately attempt to make them look like anything, to make them look overly truthful. But when I'm painting them, I, at the moment, can't think of another way of painting them. And I really like it. I really like that, those layers and those little things, those little details. I really like it. But it isn't overly conscious. There's amazingly little planning. I mean, my process is very complicated because each thing in the painting has to be found. Like, for example, there was a chair in one painting that I could see it in my mind, but I didn't have one like that. I didn't know where one would be. So So it had to be made, finished, painted, distressed.
Wow.
Dust. It all had to literally be made because these things can't be done without having the physical thing there. It's not possible.
Why is that? Can't you make up a chair a little bit? I mean, take one that's similar.
You see, I'm just not observant enough. When there's dust gathered in the cracks of a chair and there's a main light source and then a reflection from something else and something that was dripped on it 3 years ago and a place where it's worn off, I mean, I think you'd have to be a genius to anticipate how that would look. Because then it has to be turned into paint,
Yeah.
and actually shown like that. So I've got to have the physical things around. Ooh, and here's an interesting thing. The models, they're very hard to find because they have to be troubled, haunted, interesting people that show in their face, they show the depths, they show that they've had a broken heart, and they show that they have regrets and show that they're capable of a little madness and a lot of cherishing, a full person, like a person that has been matured by life.
Yes.
Then what I have to do is when they pose, it's very complicated because it's kind of hard work because then it's all, the clothing is very, very specific, has to be found or bought or distressed or, worn. And then they wear those things. And when they're in position, it's often an impossible position, actually. So it's a combination of photographs because it's anatomically impossible to do a lot of the poses. Then I say, okay, can you go to your first regret or your first betrayal? Something like this.
Wow.
And I say, can you remember that? Now, what was the wallpaper like? Was it summer or winter? Do you remember the rug on the floor? And what was your father wearing or your mother? What was she wearing and all that? And so I get them in position and tuck their hair behind their ears and pull the bra strap down and get their fingers exactly positioned right. And when everything's right and the lighting's in position, I say, okay, now go to that place, go to that betrayal.
Oh my God.
Let your face go. Just let it go. And go in your mind, forget about me now. And I correct a finger and you can see them departing out of the back door and their face falling as they go to that place.
Yes.
So that what you're capturing, because it all comes through,
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
So that what you have then is you do have the smell and the atmosphere and electricity of a particular time and place and a human being authentic.
Wow.
It's really interesting, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, I love the prompts, and it's like you can make a brush stroke and you can be feeling kind of tentative or not. Maybe you're having a hard day, but you can also make that brush stroke from a different kind of presence. You can really see it. And you certainly can see the different mark. One has a sort of force and a fire to it, and the other has, and we need both, of course. We need screaming insecurity and bravado like no one's watching to have the complete experience of your being as wide as those goalposts can be into the art. But I've never even thought about a model and bringing them in now and having them go back and using that. That's amazing.
Yeah, I don't know of another way to set up this kind of stage set. And then I have to make a photo montage because what we're then dealing with is Pythagoras and the armature of the rectangle, because now we're dealing with it on another level altogether. Because now I've got the information and I can work with that. But now what I've really got to do is the armature of the rectangle in such a way that if you turn the painting upside down, it is a powerful abstract.
Yes.
Because the thing about it, it's like any good song. Think of Mustang Sally or, Ricky, Don't Lose That Number, or any just really good song. it's not just a good story. The lyrics, oh, that's really brilliant. That's really clever.
Yeah, yeah.
What a clever story. It's not. It's ultimately music.
Yes. It's a pattern. It's a powerful pattern. Yes.
It is. It's a combination of weights and movements and lines, and they've got to be in tune. They have to be in tune.
Yes. It's not about the subject matter first. It's about that stuff. And then, yes, you can put, the subject storyline on top, but it's that abstract, universal, all human beings connect to those pattern of life and sound and visuals. And I love that about your work. And it's so true. I'm looking at the Decussio.
Yeah.
Yes. That is, can I just take that and flip it up the other way and do an abstract painting with those shades? Yeah. It's so powerful. It's so, all your work has that. I love that you see it that way.
That's a good example of an impossible one. Yeah.
Is it really?
It's impossible, completely impossible. Yeah.
How do you mean impossible? What do you mean?
Well, if you're not very disjointed, that's the meaning of décousu, actually. But if you're not disjointed, you can't do it. It's not possible. It's not humanly possible.
Yes, I see. The physically of how she's moving how her arm is going over.
Yeah.
Yeah. But again, there's so much realism here that, okay, it feels strained and awkward, but I feel the rectangle a lot, right? Which is, tell me a bit more about that, the Pythagorean and all. So the rectangle, I get it. You've got the elements.
It's really an interesting thing. And so Pythagoras, about 500 BC, was passing a blacksmith shop and he heard the hammers. And he noticed that the hammers were on different notes, very distinctly different notes. And then, so he walked in, apparently. I don't know who was there to record this, but he walked in and discovered that, the bigger hammers made a lower sound, the smaller hammers made a higher note. So then he really got to work and discovered that he could get the hammers to make specific notes. And from that, he built the structure, the Pythagorean structure, that is all of Western music.
Oh, my God.
From heavy metal to orchestral, it's precisely along the lines of Pythagoras' notes based on the blacksmith's hammers.
Oh, my God.
All of it. And the thing about it is a painting might be as reckless as anything, really wild, really thrusting, reckless painting, just like a heavy metal band. Ronnie Radke just got in touch, actually. He loves my work. Very heavy kind of metal. And so it's really wild stuff. But before they go onto the stage, the instruments are tuned and it plays according to a tempo. So in other words, even inside the most wild, furious rock is a very precise, exact structure based on Pythagoras.
Wow.
Well, if you take that line, like the fretboard of a guitar, the 12 notes come into the octave at the end with fourths and fifths. The fourths and fifths equate to, you can call the octave a half, because it's exactly a half of the string on any instrument. You can call the fourths and fifths actually thirds and quarters, because they equate to thirds and quarters of the string. But if you now take that and stretch it down vertically, and then stretch it this way as well, you now have a rectangle or a square, and all those lines of quarters, halves, thirds, and diagonals create the armature of the rectangle. And all of Western art is along not similar lines to the notes in music, but precisely the lines, precisely. It is the same.
I mean, you're talking about compositional lines that you can construct in a Caravaggio, or, I mean, is that what you mean? Like the golden mean? But they don't, not every form touches those margins, right? I mean, if you have a Winslow Homer water scene, I mean, the proportions are so wildly different. Are you saying that underneath that all those marks? I mean, I'm not aware of it, but maybe I am. I know what good design is, and that's what you're talking about here, because that structure provides a potency that we're all after. So maybe I'm doing it unintentionally, does that make sense? Like, how is it so precise?
It does. Well, some people do it very deliberately, but it does pertain to every kind of painting. But it's a little bit like the keyboard. Take a piano keyboard. When you compose a beautiful piece of music on the keyboard, you only use a small handful of notes.
Mm-hmm.
So any Caravaggio, it doesn't use all those points and all those lines, not at all. It only uses sometimes just 2 lines.
Uh-huh.
Very often in much of the Baroque art, it's simply a leaning cross.
Yes.
In much of that. And all it really pertains to, because it only requires the main anatomy of the painting to in some way make a melody that is in tune. So if you take a painting that's not particularly good and you put the armature on it, and in Photoshop or PowerPoint, you move it into position on the armature.
Wow.
The main points, the important lines.
Yes.
The thrust or what holds it up,
Or what we notice, what has contrast, what we see.
Yeah.
That the bigger conversation, the loudness of things. If those are on those margins, that improves it, right?
Oh, and if you compare them, it's like night and day. It's like night and day. It's the most extraordinary thing. Like right now, I'm on a painting, very big painting. I'm putting in 3 tomatoes. They're not particularly symbolic. They may be, but I don't know. They're not important, and I don't want people to see them particularly. So I'm going to great lengths to not put them on any of the Pythagorean crossovers, because if I put them on the crossover of those lines, they will notice. If I take them off those lines, they're still right there on the canvas, but you won't notice them.
It's incredible because I don't know, how did you think of this? I mean, the architecture, the structure of music transposed, drawn through and extended onto a rectangle that relates to visual art. That's amazing. How would me and other people find out more about this? Is this something that you're thinking of? I've never read anything about this, what you're describing, although I intuit it, right? Great music has quiet parts and surprise and all that, but never an actual scientific, diagrammatic connection in the way you're doing it. It's sort of amazing.
But it's a bit like this. You go on a date with a very beautiful woman, and she walks ahead of you out of the restaurant with that astonishing poetic walk, with her hips rolling. She's not even thinking about it, but she goes like liquid between the tables out of the restaurant. And it's like your heart becomes hollow and astonished. And it's astonishing. Women will never understand how astonishing that is, because we get to see it. In her body is a completely, you could call it scientific, completely biological, very complex system of structures that cause that, and a massive amount of chemistry. That structure is phenomenally built with cartilage and, the lower limbs with the double bone, allowing them to twist, the upper ones with the single bones for strength, and the way the joints are organized. Behind all that fabulously sensual look is a scientific structure, and behind a heart-rending piece of music is a Pythagorean structure.
Wow.
And behind a heavy metal, fantastic, powerful song that is completely rebellious is the Pythagorean structure. But it's hidden. It's, the woman doesn't turn around and say, oh, by the way, I've got I've got a skeleton inside me.
Yes, right. Yeah, it's amazing. And so your new challenge, and you compose these elements, and now you have the challenge of the rectangle. And you said you were taking a lot of photographs. You have like dozens that you're pinning up and looking at, or you're painting from life. How do you then start and go into the actual making of the picture now, with all this subject matter? And
well, because it involves mixed perspectives, it all has to be rebuilt, because the table is flat. The cups are in two perspectives mixed. The human being may be in an impossible position, so they have to be rebuilt. It all has to be kind of rebuilt as a photo montage in a sense, and then painted, because it's impossible. But all the while, I kind of know if I do this and do that and use this material and depict that like that and go back to the original material to refer for color, then in the end it will be plausible.
Yes, yeah.
I don't want any of the artifice to particularly notice. I go through all that. The architect uses this material and that material and this height and that doorway and this.
Right.
But ultimately, he wants someone to come in the doorway and have this narrow down, but when you walk through there, have it just open up and give you that sign, feeling. He doesn't want you to say, oh, this is stainless steel here, and oh yeah, this is.
Of course.
He wants you to have an experience, So I don't want people to see any of that.
Right. And I love the idea that you're just optimizing every square inch and adjusting perspective. So there's this instant hit that the viewer gets, and it's just all prepped. It's a piece of theater in a way,
Yeah, it is in a sense. Yeah, it is like that. Yeah, I worry about it.
How so?
Well, I worry that it's overwrought. You know what I mean?
It doesn't feel that way because it's so generous in the sensitivity. And I mean, this is just from my perspective, the sensitivity and the honest inquiry of you is very giving. And so I don't think it feels like you're giving us a heavy lift. It's light in a way. I mean, there's a lightness to this work, even though it's informed by challenges and, even the model is thinking of difficulties and other things. But I think it's just the presentation and the sensitivity you bring to it. It doesn't have that quality to me. That's just my experience looking at it. It's like I get to always say when I look at your work, I know that. Oh, yes, that's how my thumb looks, or that's what a nail feels like, or that reminds me of my mom when I, in her last years of life, or just how the teacup feels. And it's referencing so much of how things are. And there's a magical reassurance in that we get a lot when we look at your work.
I really like that, Nick. Thank you. I really like that. Yeah, that's the best reaction, That's really good.
So I'm curious, as we kind of closing up here, there is so much, I just regret that we just can go on. These meetings need to be like 2 hours, but do you know where you're going for the future? And I know you have you're writing constantly. Do you have a sense of what the coming work is going to be?
I think it's too complicated to really know.
Yeah.
So I do have plans all the time because I'm always writing, looking ahead and saying, I really need to solve this. And I feel if I do that and take this approach and enlarge this, but begin to diminish that, if I were to do this. But, I've got, 6 or 10 of those kind of projections at any one time.
Yeah.
But the work is so complicated and actually intimidating. It's intimidating so that I almost never feel confident. So that when I go to work, I feel it can take me a couple of hours to know how to start every day.
Wow.
And where I'm kind of scratching my head and saying, well, yeah, I mean, but what does that relate to? And if I can, maybe, I'm not sure, let's look at this. Yeah, maybe that could be the...
right. You're thinking about, you're trying to anticipate, but you can't. But yeah, I get that.
It's like I'm, a child learning, just beginning in a sense every day. Just begin.
Wow.
And so it's way too complicated to really anticipate what's next. I have all these ideas, but I'm never sure.
And I think that's just a beautiful idea, because as soon as we pin it down, we shortchange it. I love that there's the upside of uncertainty and the risk and not being confident and trying things ends up with, I think, better work and outcomes that are powerful and to you, surprising even,
It's true, yeah. The paintings are, even after all that process and all that planning, this painting I'm on at the moment, the one I was mentioning with the tomatoes, quite often right till the last 3% of the work, I won't be satisfied at all. I'll say, oh God, what a mistake. And then there'll be things I do that will go, oh my God, I never realized that that needed to be pushed way back for it to work.
Right.
But I find it kind of scary, because there it is. God, I don't even begin to know how to solve. But then I'll glance at it and have an idea and see, it could work. And then it works. And in the end, they surprise me. Yeah.
Edward, listen, just wonderful. I so enjoyed this conversation. Thank you so much for, we're just scratching the surface. You guys listening, you've got to go see his work. You can go to art2life.com and click on podcasts to see what he's making. Edward, real quick, anything coming up for you that you want our listeners to go see? You have a show. I know you've had shows in, Miami and New York. And is there something coming up where people can see your original work? And we'll put all this in the show links, you guys, but just if there's something that you want to highlight, I'd love to have you share that.
There are a few things coming up. I'm with Waterhouse and Dodd in New York, and they're showing me in San Francisco at the moment, at the art fair in San Francisco. Then I'll be showing in Miami, and then in Palm Beach in February. And right now I've got a 2-month show going on in Munich with Benjamin Eck. Just a couple of paintings, actually, but in a show in an underground bunker from the Second World War.
Oh, my God. That's perfect.
Kind of perfect. Yeah, it is. It is. Talk about vulnerability. So, that's an interesting experience. And Waterhouse and Dodd are talking about a one-man show in the fall of 2023.
We'll put all those links in there, and for people to, if people want to get on, I don't know if you have a mailing list or if people can stay in touch with you, but we'll have all those links in the show notes.
Great.
Again, thank you so much. This has been really an honor to speak with you about your work and all of it. Thanks.
Thank you for having me, Nick. Thank you.
Hey, thanks for listening to the Art2Life show. If you enjoyed the podcast, please help me get the word out by sharing it with your friends on Instagram at Art2Life_world. The recording of this and all episodes, along with a place to leave comments, see additional photos, and discover a whole new approach to making art, can be found by going to Art2Lifepodcast.com. And secondly, if you could leave a rating and review in whatever app you're listening on today, I would super appreciate it. It makes a big difference. And last but not least, before you go, if you'd like to be on my artist list, every Sunday morning I send out a video blog all about art making. Go to Art2Lifepodcast.com to sign up. And all these links are in the show notes, of course. Thanks so much for being here, and we'll see you next week.